I never thought I'd leave home at 31, especially not because of a cake. My name is Rachel Kim, and I'm a chef at a small restaurant in Seattle. Every day, I stand among the scent of butter, vanilla, and the rhythmic sound of knives, chopping vegetables, a place where I find peace, though no one in my family ever understood that. To them, I'm just the daughter who cooks for a living, while my sister Emily, a celebrated doctor, is praised as the pride of the family. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that as long as I lived well, their opinions couldn't hurt me. But then came the day my own mother's words made me realize, in that house, love always came with conditions. That was the moment I understood sometimes family isn't the place you return to. It's the place you must learn to walk away from. I was born into a Korean American family in the suburbs of Portland. My father was an electrical engineer, and my mother, an accountant, both firm believers that success only has one shape: fame, degrees, and money. From a young age, I learned to read their expressions like an old book. When my sister Emily brought home an A in chemistry, my mother's face would light up as she made a special seaweed soup to celebrate. But when I proudly showed her the first sponge cake I ever baked, she just glanced at it and said, "Good, but don't forget to study for the Saturday." I grew used to standing outside the frame of pride. In the family photos hanging in our living room, Emily was always in the middle, wrapped in our parents' arms, while I stood off to the side holding a plate of food or cleaning the table. Once, I joked, "I'm like the family's personal waitress." My mother chuckled softly. "Well, at least you're good at it." When I was little, I dreamed of becoming an architect like my father. But as I grew up, I realized my passion wasn't in blueprints. It lived in the smell of melting butter and the sizzle of oil in a hot pan. I loved creating something that made people smile. At 15, I cooked a honey-roasted chicken and fruit salad for my mother's birthday. Everyone finished their plates, but instead of praise, she just said, "Next time, don't waste your time. You should study more math." I still remember that night. As I washed the dishes, my tears blended with the warm water. I didn't cry out of anger, but because I understood, maybe for the first time, that in my mother's eyes, love wasn't meant for those who were different. When Emily got into medical school, my parents threw a party. Around that same time, I had been accepted into a culinary school in Seattle. My news, however, only made the room feel awkward. My mother said flatly, "You can study whatever you want, just don't expect us to brag about it to the relatives." I smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't matter, but inside, something small began to break. In the years that followed, I rarely went home. Each visit felt like stepping into a house where I no longer belonged. The only conversations were about Emily's successful surgeries, her awards, her conferences, the ones that everyone admired. I would sit quietly, staring at a glass of orange juice, listening to the clink of silverware, like the sound of distance itself. Once, I asked my mother, "Have I ever made you proud?" She looked up, surprised, and replied softly, "I've always loved you, Rachel, but you know how life is. Cooking isn't really a future, but it's what I'm best at. Being good at something doesn't matter if it can't give you stability." Her words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they confirmed what I had always feared. I didn't blame her right away, but that night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment, the comparisons, the pitying looks when relatives said, "Oh, Rachel's just a chef?" And the quiet silence of my father whenever I needed him to speak up for me. My father was the kind of man who never yelled, but never took sides either. He believed silence made him innocent. Once I asked, "Dad, what do you think about my work?" He said simply, "As long as you can make a living." It sounded harmless, yet it made me feel like I was just surviving in a world that wasn't mine. Emily, on the other hand, never meant to hurt me. She was kind, gentle, and always tried to include me. But her perfection suffocated me. When I posted pictures of my dishes online, she'd comment, "You're so talented, sis." And right after, Mom would text me, "Learn from your sister's dedication." I tried to act like everything was fine, that I didn't need their approval. But deep down, a part of me still longed to hear those words, "I'm proud of you," just once. Instead, I got, "Maybe you should take accounting classes, like me. How long do you plan on being a chef? Your sister's giving a speech at a conference. You could help me prepare the food if you're free." That's how they saw me. the one behind the scenes, the one who cleaned up, the nameless helper in the shining story of our family. Over time, I learned to wear a mask. I smiled at family parties, offered congratulations, then went back to my small Seattle apartment, the only place I could truly be myself. There, I had my own kitchen, soft music playing at night, and no one judged me by my paycheck. Yet, deep inside, I still carried the wound of being unseen. One rainy evening, while making onion soup for a customer, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "Rachel, come home this weekend. Emily just won Young Doctor of the Year. I want the whole family together." I hesitated, then said, "I'm busy with work, Mom." "You're always busy. Can't you think of your family for once?" I wanted to explain, but stopped myself. She hadn't even asked, "How's your work going?" Or, "Are you happy?" To her, my life was just a series of poor choices. That night, after closing the kitchen, I looked at my hands rough from heat, but warm with purpose, and I whispered, "If they can't see my worth, then I'll have to see it myself." I didn't know that just a few months later, one cruel comment at a birthday party would change everything. But deep down, I already felt it. Something inside me was starting to walk away. That day, Seattle was covered in a thin, misty rain, the kind that makes the whole city seem like it's quietly breathing. I remember standing in front of the mirror for a long time, holding a cake box in my hands. On top of the cake, I had carefully written the words, "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Rachel." Just 6 simple words, yet it took me nearly an hour to make them look perfect. I didn't know why I was so nervous. Maybe, deep down, I still hoped that just once my mother would smile, truly smile, when she saw something I made for her. That day, the Kim house was more crowded than usual. Distant relatives, a few of my father's old coworkers, and of course Emily, my younger sister, glowing like a star. When I walked in, all eyes turned to her. I was just a faint shadow slipping quietly through the doorway. "Rachel, you made it!" Emily called out, running to hug me. "Yeah," I smiled softly. "I brought the cake." My mother came out from the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. She still looked beautiful, graceful, strong, elegant, but her eyes held that same familiar disappointment. "You made the cake?" she asked, glancing at the box. "Yes, I thought you'd like matcha flavor, so—" "Oh, you're still making those things? Why don't you try something more practical?" Her words were light, but they hit me like a slap. The table erupted in polite laughter. I forced a smile, placing the cake down and greeting my father. He gave a quick nod, his eyes sliding away, afraid to get involved. Dinner began. The room filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, stories about vacations and Emily's success, updates about my father's company restructuring. No one asked me about work. Not one person. "Emily's been invited to speak at an international medical conference," a relative said proudly. "Oh, that's wonderful," my mother replied, her eyes shining. "Your father and I are so proud of her, Rachel. She's worked so hard, not like someone who just stays in the kitchen all day." The laughter died instantly. Everyone knew who someone was. I set my glass down, my throat tightening. "I work hard too, Mom," I said quietly. "I'm leading the new kitchen team at the restaurant." She gave a faint, dismissive smile. "Yes, I know. But cooking well, anyone can cook. That's not a career, Rachel. That's a hobby." I felt the heat rise in my face. A few guests tried to laugh it off. Emily gave Mom a pleading look, but she kept going. "You're smart, educated, and this is what you choose. Sometimes I wonder if you ever think about your future." I clenched my hands under the table. "Mom, I have a good life. I do what I love. Love is for your free time, not for surviving on." Her voice grew louder, and I could feel the room's attention turning toward us. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom's just worried, Rachel, don't—" But then Mom said the words that broke me. "Worried? I'm tired, Emily. Rachel has always been a disappointment. Tell me, what do I have to show after all these years? People ask what my eldest daughter does, and I have to say, she's a cook in Seattle? I wish I didn't have to live with that shame anymore." The room fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat heavy, unsteady. That sentence, "I wish I didn't have to endure you anymore," echoed in my mind like a verdict. I stood up. No one moved. My father stared at his plate. Emily's lips parted, but I raised my hand to stop her. "You won't have to endure anything anymore, Mom. I said, my voice trembling. I promise you'll never have to be ashamed of me again. I grabbed my bag. Rachel, don't be dramatic, she called after me. I turned to her one last time. No, Mom, I'm finally doing what I should have done long ago. Then I walked out from the house that once felt safe. Now nothing but a wound. The rain was still falling, gentle but cold. I didn't open my umbrella. I let the rain mix with my tears. Driving back to Seattle, the images replayed in my mind. Mom's cold eyes, Dad's silence, Emily's helpless smile. I didn't feel angry anymore, just empty, as if the thread that tied us together had quietly snapped. That night, I set my phone on the table. A message from Mom appeared. Can we talk like adults? I stared at the words for a long time, then turned the phone off. And in that silence, I finally understood. Sometimes, to save yourself, you have to accept being the ungrateful child in your own story. I don't remember how long I drove that night. All I know is that when I finally stopped, the clock on the dashboard read 2:17 a.m., and the rain was still falling soft but relentless, as if trying to wash away my past. I sat in the car, staring at the raindrops on the windshield, feeling so empty I almost forgot what emotions felt like. I turned on my phone. A message from my mother appeared. Don't be childish. I just want what's best for you. I laughed a tired, broken sound, without tears or air. Best for me? If that was love, then I had been a fool for believing love had to hurt that much. I turned the phone off, removed the SIM card, and threw it into a roadside trash bin. Not out of anger, but because I knew if there was still a way back, I might lose the courage to keep going. The next morning, I left Portland. All I had were a few clothes, my favorite chef's knife, and a worn notebook filled with recipes I'd written over the past 4 years. I drove back to Seattle, the only place where I'd ever truly felt like myself. I rented a small apartment in Capitol Hill on the 3rd floor of an old building with a balcony overlooking a street bathed in golden lights. Every night, I sat there, listening to the cars, the laughter, and the quiet rhythm of life around me. No one knew who I was. No one compared me to anyone. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was taking up too much space. For an entire month, I didn't contact my family, no calls, no messages, no emails. My mother tried reaching out through my old address, but I never replied. I started learning how to live again, not as Mrs. Kim's daughter, but as Rachel Kim, a woman rebuilding herself from zero. One afternoon, while wandering through a farmer's market, I spotted an old building with a crooked wooden sign. For Lee's, former cafe. The windows were dusty, the inside empty, but sunlight streaming through the cracks made it look alive somehow. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding, as a wild thought flashed through my mind. What if I open a small cafe here? I didn't have much savings, just enough for a few months' rent, but the thought burned inside me, stubborn and warm, like a tiny flame that refused to die. I called the landlord, an elderly Italian man named Lorenzo. He looked me over and asked bluntly, "Do you have any business experience?" "I'm a chef," I said, "but I know how to make people feel at home." "Ah," he smiled and offered me a lease at a price far below market. "You remind me of my wife," he said. "She started with just an oven and a dream, too." 3 months later, Second Chance Cafe opened its doors. I painted the walls myself, built the tables, hand-lettered the sign. Every corner carried a piece of me, imperfect but real. The menu was simple: toasted bread, onion soup, hand-brewed coffee, and a few Korean dishes my mother once taught me. I remember the opening night, just 5 customers, a few students, an elderly man, and a woman with her little boy. They ate, smiled, and said, "Thank you, this tastes like home." I almost cried, because for the first time, someone called my cooking home. From then on, life settled into a rhythm of its own. Every morning, I opened the cafe at 7, greeting customers with a genuine smile. In the afternoons, I taught free cooking classes for homeless teens, kids who had been told they were useless, just like I once was. I told them, "Nothing is useless if it makes you happy. The world only feels harsh when you let it define your worth." One of my students, Lena, a 17-year-old girl with a single mom, dreamed of becoming a chef. Her eyes shone every time I showed her how to whisk eggs or chop onions. Looking at her, I saw a reflection of myself, a girl who only ever needed one person to believe in her, but never got it. One late evening, as I was cleaning up, the cafe phone rang. It was Emily. Somehow, she'd found my number online. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Better than ever," I said, calm and steady. "Mom's still mad, but I think she misses you." "That's fine," I replied, "but I'm not someone they can control anymore." There was a long pause. "I miss you," Emily whispered. "I miss you too," I sighed. "But you know, some wounds don't need to heal. They just need to be accepted." I hung up and sat in silence. I didn't cry. I just smiled, because for the first time, I felt free. When the morning light poured through the cafe windows, I hung a small new sign beside the door. A place for anyone to start over, no matter how many times they've fallen. I thought of my mother. Even though she wasn't there, I still cooked the way she'd taught me, with care, precision, and emotion. I didn't know if we'd ever speak again like normal people. But I knew one thing for sure. I no longer needed their approval to know I was worthy. I wasn't running away from my past. I was simply choosing a new beginning. And maybe that's how I finally saved myself. 3 months after leaving Seattle, I arrived in Portland, a city just a few hours away by car. But it felt like another world entirely. Everything was unfamiliar, yet somehow, I felt lighter than I had in years. There were no more judgmental check-in calls, no more dinners filled with my mother's cold stares or my father's disappointed sighs. It was just me, a suitcase, and a dream I had buried deep inside, to own a small diner called Second Chance. And I rented a tiny ground floor room in an old building near the local market. Every morning, I woke at 5 a.m., walked through misty streets, smelled the warm scent of bread from the bakery across the road, and listened to the streetcar rumbling through narrow alleys. This city didn't care who you were, where you came from, or how many times you'd failed, and that was exactly what I needed. I started from nothing. No money, no reputation, no one by my side. I worked part-time at a small eatery during the day and spent my nights sketching business plans on crumpled sheets of paper. I saved every penny, skipped fancy meals, and taught myself how to do bookkeeping, apply for business permits, and even design my own signboard. Then one autumn afternoon, it finally happened. A wooden sign that read, "Second Chance, Homemade Meals with Love," was hung above the door. I stood outside, staring at it under the golden light, and cried, not from exhaustion, but because, for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. At first, there weren't many customers, just a few locals curious enough to stop by. I served simple dishes: pumpkin soup, honey chicken sandwiches, creamy pasta. But I think what kept them coming back wasn't the food, it was the way I spoke to them. Sincere, unhurried, real. One elderly lady came in every evening. She told me once, "You know, dear, your soup reminds me of my husband when he was young. Thank you for giving me a reason to leave the house each day." I smiled, and that night, I cried again, not from sadness, but from realizing that what I was doing finally meant something beyond pleasing my parents. That moment gave me an idea. I started hosting free cooking classes for young people who couldn't afford them, people like me, once dismissed for chasing what they loved. The first class had only 3 people: a dropout boy, a single mom, and an ex-convict. We chopped vegetables, burned the soup, and laughed the whole time. And in their eyes, I saw a light, the kind of hope I'd lost years ago in my family's kitchen. Slowly, Second Chance became more than a cafe. It became a community, a place where people came not just to eat, but to feel heard. Word spread. A local radio show, Voices of Portland, invited me to share my story: how the family failure found herself again through cooking. After it aired, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. People came from all over the city saying, "We just wanted to try Rachel Kim's food." One night, after closing, I stood alone in the kitchen. The brass pots gleamed under soft light, jazz music played low, and I poured myself a cheap glass of wine. Then, like a whisper, I heard my mother's old voice in my head. "You'll never make anything of yourself if all you do is cook." I smiled softly and said aloud, "Mom, I did it. Not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right." The next day, the local paper ran a headline: "The woman who turned a small kitchen into a place that heals broken hearts." Quote. I read it over and over, not out of pride, but because, in every line, I saw a new Rachel. Strong, free, no longer defined by anyone's approval. Sometimes I still dream of our old house in Seattle, the long wooden table, the silent dinners, the clinking of cutlery in a room full of tension. But when I wake up and see the morning light spilling into my cafe, hear the laughter of my students preparing for class, I know I made the right choice. I am no longer the overlooked second daughter. I am Rachel Kim, the founder of Second Chance, a place where every mistake deserves a fresh start, including the courage to love yourself again. A year after Second Chance opened, my life had completely changed. Every morning, I woke up in the tiny apartment above the cafe, listening to the streetcars passing by and the laughter of regular customers downstairs. Everything felt so peaceful that I sometimes forgot I once had a family. Until one rainy afternoon in April, the raindrops tapped softly on the window and the cafe's sign outside. I was wiping down a table when the door opened. A woman stepped in soaked coat, messy hair, and I nearly dropped the plate in my hand. It was Emily. My sister, the one I hadn't seen in almost 2 years, stood there, pale and exhausted. Her once perfect white blouse had been replaced with a wrinkled gray shirt. "Rachel," she whispered. Her voice trembled. I need to talk to you." I set the plate down, wiped my hands on my apron, and kept my tone calm. "Sit down. What would you like to drink?" She shook her head, and tears welled up. "You've probably heard already. I've been suspended from the hospital. A patient died during surgery. They said it was my fault." Her voice cracked. "I lost my job, my home. Mom and Dad, they're panicking, struggling with money. I came here to ask if you could help." I stood still, not shocked, just quiet. A part of me had always known this day would come. My family had built their world around Emily's perfection, believing she could never fall. But everyone breaks, eventually. "You have your restaurant now," she continued. "Maybe you could help me find a job, or lend Mom and Dad some money." I cut her off. "Do you think I'm a bank, Emily?" She lowered her head, silent. Between us, the air was heavy, only the sound of rain against the window filled the room. I took a slow breath. "Do you remember Mom's birthday? The day I brought her that cake? You laughed with them when she said I should learn to live more like you." I walked out of that house in tears. No one stopped me. No one said sorry. Emily didn't look up. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know, and I regret it. But now everything's gone. You're the only one I can turn to." When I met her eyes, I saw real fear, not of losing her career, but of having nowhere left to belong. I understood that feeling. I had lived it, but the difference was I had built myself back up while they were still waiting for someone to rescue them. "I don't hate you, Emily," I said softly, "but I can't go back to being the person this family leans on only when things fall apart. I spent too many years learning to stand without them." Tears streamed down her face. "You changed." I smiled, gently. "No, I've just come back to who I really am." She stood, glancing around the cafe. On the walls hung photos of my students' bright smiles, holding the dishes they had made. She stopped at one picture where I was laughing with them. "You look happy," she said quietly. "I am," I replied. "And I hope one day you'll find something that makes you happy too, not because someone expects it, but because you truly want it." Emily was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded, turned, and walked out. As the door closed, a gust of wind carried in the smell of rain mixed with warm pastries. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the reflections of the streetlights shimmer in the puddles outside. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means letting go of the weight you've been carrying. That night, I opened my planner and added a new line: "Second Chance program for those who've lost direction, not just in work, but in life." You quote. I thought of Emily, of my parents, of the girl I used to be. Maybe we all need a second chance, but the truth is, no one can give it to us. We have to be brave enough to give it to ourselves. A summer morning, the sun rose earlier than usual. Golden light poured through the cafe windows, landing softly on the small wooden tables of Second Chance. I placed a vase of fresh sunflowers on the counter, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, my favorite spot. The city was still as noisy as ever, but inside me, there was a strange calm. Today, the cafe was hosting a special class, Cooking for Healing Hearts. The students were people who had been through pain, losing a job, a divorce, or, like me, losing faith in family. I watched them set the tables, wash vegetables, and mix dough. Among them was a young girl named Lily, who had run away from home after her parents forced her to study law. She was smiling brightly as her first ever cake puffed up perfectly in the oven. "Look, Miss Rachel, it's really rising." "Yes, it is," I smiled. "Just like you." In Lily's laughter, I saw my younger self, the girl who once tried so hard to be loved, who believed her worth depended on others' approval. But now, I know, our value doesn't need proof. It just needs truth. Around noon, a letter arrived at the cafe. The mailman said, "Miss Kim, this came from Seattle. Looks important." Quote. I opened it and instantly recognized the handwriting, my mother's. "Rachel, your sister Emily told us everything. You've changed so much I almost didn't recognize you. But I've also realized my own mistakes. Your father and I were so focused on creating the perfect image that we forgot love should never come with conditions. If you can, please give us a chance not to go back to the past, but to begin again, as who we truly are." Mom, I do. I read the letter over and over, emotions swirling inside me. Years ago, I dreamed of hearing these words. I thought I'd cry, rush home, and finally feel accepted. But now, I just felt peace. Not because she apologized, but because I no longer needed her apology to forgive. I wrote back a short reply. "I wish you and Dad peace. I've found my true family where I belong, and I hope someday you'll find that for yourselves too. Rachel." Yen. When I folded the letter, my hands didn't tremble anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply free. That evening, I hosted a small party at the cafe, not to celebrate fame or success, but to honor 1 full year of Second Chance. On the wall were photos of past students. One had opened a bakery, one returned to school, and one simply learned how to smile again after years of shutting down. When everyone raised their glasses, I stood in the middle of the room and said, "A year ago, I opened this cafe to give myself a second chance, but all of you have given me something greater. The chance to believe that love still exists, if we're brave enough to open our hearts." Applause filled the room. Someone turned on music, and we danced, laughed, and celebrated. Through the crowd, I saw Emily walk in. She didn't say a word, just smiled and nodded. I smiled back. No explanations, no tears. We both understood. When night fell and everyone left, I cleaned up, then stepped outside. The sky was filled with stars. I looked up and saw my reflection in the glass door, no longer a wounded girl, but a woman who had learned to love herself. I remembered what I once told Emily. Real family is the people who see your worth when others don't. Now, I truly had such a family, not by blood, but by heart. They came, learned, laughed, and left, each carrying a piece of Second Chance with them. And I knew that was the real meaning of my life. I turned off the lights, leaving only a small glow inside. Outside, the sign Second Chance shimmered under the moonlight, gentle, glowing, like a quiet reminder that every beginning is worth it, no matter how late it comes. I whispered softly to myself, "I've come home, Mom. Not to the house, but to myself." Quote. And for the first time in years, my heart was completely at peace.